A Hobbit's Tale. Concerning hobbits. Hobbits must seem of little importance, nor counted among the very wise. Hobbits' only real passion is for food, as we have also developed a keen interest in the smoking of pipeweed. But where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet and good-tilled earth. For all hobbits share a love of things that grow. It is no bad thing to celebrate a simple life.
Bilbo's Prologue. Bilbo's Prologue is in the extended edition to The Lord of the Rings. In the theatrical edition, the movie starts with Frodo reading with his back up against a tree and Gandalf coming down the rutted road with his wagon. In the extended edition, it starts with Bilbo right at his desk in the Red Book and giving us the prologue to The Lord of the Rings. Now, what is this prologue from? Actually, it's kind of like what they did is they tried to make the prologue in the film, the prologue that Tolkien wrote in The Lord of the Rings, where he talks about concerning hobbits, right? That's one section of the prologue. Concerning pipeweed, I can't remember the other one concerning pipeweed and smoking of tobacco. There's one concerning about Bilbo's adventure with the ring. I can't remember all the little parts of it, but it divides that up, and it talks about that everything except the ring part. And so I want to read a couple of lines from the prologue, and then kind of counterpoint them to, and as a counterpoint, have what they wrote in the prologue to the film, to the extended edition that you can get. Watch that instead of the theatrical one. It's still better.
Absolutely.
All right, so this is from Concerning Hobbits, where they got Bilbo's Prologue. The Shire was divided into 4 quarters. The farthings already referred to, north, south, east, and west, and these again, each into a number of folklands, which still bore the names of some of the old leading families. Although by the time of this history, these names were no longer found only in their proper folklands. And then in the Bilbo's Prologue, they wrote, hobbits have been living and farming in the 4 farthings of the Shire for many hundreds of years. So that almost compresses it all down. Quite content to ignore and be ignored by the world of the big folk. So here, Tolkien writes they're the 4 farthings. They still bore the names of some of the old leading families, although by the time of this history, these names were no longer found in their proper folkland. So right there, you get that they shortened it down to say 4 farthings for many hundreds of years, without the details that Tolkien had in there. So I kind of thought that was a good way of condensing what Tolkien wrote. Here's another clip about pipeweed. There is another astonishing thing about hobbits of old that must be mentioned, an astonishing habit. They imbibed or inhaled through pipes of clay or wood the smoke of the burning leaves of a herb, which they called pipeweed or leaf, a variety probably of nicotiana. Anyway, a great deal of mystery surrounds the origin of this particular custom, or art, as the hobbits prefer to call it. And in the prologue in the films, they wrote, as we have also developed a keen interest in the brewing of ales and the smoking of pipeweed. That was a little short, but Tolkien really liked his pipe, so I think he kind of gave him a little bit more due than we might have seen in the films. So the question I think that we have to address is, did they do a good job taking Tolkien's prologue to give us an idea of who hobbits were and making it Bilbo's prologue in the films? That's the question, kind of general, and we'll get down to the specifics of is it lore friendly and do we like it and all that sort of stuff. Do you have any thoughts on that, Michael?
Yeah. So the section of in the beginning, the prologue of Lord of the Rings has 5 sections. It has concerning hobbits, has concerning pipeweed, it has the ordering of the Shire, the finding of the ring, and notes on Shire records. And so what we have in the movie is clearly an attempt to highly truncate a couple of those, which is concerning hobbits and concerning pipeweed, into a few sentences. They ignore the ordering of the Shire entirely. They ignore the finding of the ring, which is intended in the books to give us a synopsis of Bilbo's trip in The Hobbit. So they don't try to sum up that in the movie version, and they ignore on the Shire records. So they only actually touch on 2 of the 5 sections in the prologue. And so what I would say is, they're just, the extended edition is just trying to put in something which gives homage, in my opinion, to the prologue in the book, and briefly introduces us in the same manner that Tolkien was trying to introduce us in a literary way, briefly introduces us cinematically to the idea of hobbits and what makes them different. Interestingly enough, a lot of people, and this is just a side note, hobbits are clearly on the metaphysical plane, they're clearly a sub race of men. They are actually not, they're not a dwarf and they're not an elf, and they're not even their own new thing in that sense. In Tolkien's Legendarium, I mean, they are a new thing in the sense that they're a sub race of men, but there is a kind of mystery to them, in the sense that when in the Silmarillion you have basically nothing about them, and so in most of his other books, and so they were kind of this shoehorn in a way. They were a literary shoehorn because he had written a book called The Hobbit, and so he had to shoehorn them in. I was glad. I remember seeing this for the first time, the extended edition for the first time, and I thought, oh, that's cool. They've put in a few lines about, giving a homage to Tolkien's effort. Do I think they did it justice? No, but in a way, I don't know that they could have. How long do you want this to be? So anyway, we'll get into that when we talk about the ratings.
It's sort of like the appendix for the Hobbits comes before the books. Yeah, let's get into our changes then, what we think about this here. So the first question, as is usual, is it lore friendly? Okay, I'm going to make a point here that they talk about, let's see. It has been remarked by some hobbits that hobbits' only real passion is for food, as we have also developed a keen interest in the brewing of ales. But have they? I guess maybe they like food and pipeweed. So, okay, true. And then he writes, but where our hearts truly lie is in peace and quiet and good tilled earth, which, yeah, sure. I mean, in fact, as Michael pointed out to me earlier, good tilled earth is a quote directly from the third paragraph of Concerning Hobbits, where, do you have a quote in front of you?
It says, hobbits are an unobtrusive but a very ancient people, more numerous formerly than they are today, for they love peace and quiet and good tilled earth. A well-ordered and well-farmed countryside was their favorite haunt.
Well-ordered. Does that mean they just had straight plow lines?
Yeah, I mean, order when it comes to land, because that's what it's talking about. It has to do with boundaries and stewardship of the earth, I guess, in an ancient sense,
right? Which does tie with what Tolkien thought, right? He hated the machinery, he hated the encroachment of cities onto the countryside,
right?
All right, and okay, so
and it says it also points out that they it says their faces were as a rule good-natured rather than beautiful, broad, bright-cheeked, red-eyed, red-cheeked, with mouths apt to laughter and to eating and drinking. And laugh they did, and eat, and drink, often and heartily, being fond of simple jests at all times, and of 6 meals a day when they could get them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess they love food, but maybe their real passion, they have a lot of real passions. Food is just one of them.
Right. Yeah, that whole thing. I always felt like the line that they give in the movie, where they said their real love was for food. That's a stretch. That's not anything. I mean, when you read the prologue from Tolkien, you get a sense of lots of their loves, and of which, like you said, Jonathan, one of them was eating. But that just seemed like more of a setup for some of the jokes in the movie,
which is probably one of my least favorite jokes, which is the whole lembas way bread, and then Legolas says to them, one bite will sustain you for an entire day. And Pippin says to Merry, or is it Merry to Pippin? I can't remember. He's like, how many did you eat? He's like, 2 or something like that. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. You just minimized way bread. Yeah.
So that was, there was one food joke about what about second breakfast. That was funny. I laughed at that. Was good. I laughed at that.
Yeah. All right. Is it lore friendly? Yes, I believe it is lore friendly. I don't think he does anything that's really anti Tolkien lore in the prologue.
Right. The purists like us wish it were longer, but it was indeed lore friendly.
Yeah. No issues there. All right. Next question. Does the change make for better cinema?
Well, in this case, it's an interesting one, right? Because it's the extended edition only. So in this case, I'm looking at, does it make for better cinema? Clearly, they cut it from the first piece of cinema, which was on the screen, and then they added it the second one, so they thought it made it somewhat better.
That's
somehow.
a good point.
And the answer, and so my answer to that actually is yes, it does, because it actually adds in something that was missing from the first round in the theaters, which is pretty cool. Which is teaching us a little bit about hobbits beforehand.
Yeah. The question then also is does it make for better cinema to have it be longer or to not have it at all? And I feel like they made a good decision for not making it longer and talking about a lot of the other details that Tolkien put into his prologue that is kind of unnecessary. You still want to discover the characters through what they do, not by being told who they are.
Right.
It's boring when somebody says they love each other. Like, no. You show us how they love each other in the same way. You show us how they like to farm. You show us that they do some
don't just
that.
tell us.
Yeah.
Yep. You know what's funny is I've always thought, and this is just a random side note, but I've always thought that that the prologue, as I've read it and reread it, and I actually don't read the prologue every time to my kids. I think I read it every other or third time. But because when they're very young, if I'm reading to a particularly young batch of kids, they have very little patience for the prologue.
Totally.
But I've always thought that the prologue was kind of sort of Tolkien's notes, where he was getting those creative juices going. You know how Tolkien used to discover his stories, not plan them out. So the more he talks about hobbits from his notes and the more he develops them, the more he can, I think, get a feel and discover more of their story. And so I always felt like that was sort of Tolkien revving his engine, so to speak, on the Hobbit side of the story. But could be wrong.
I'd be curious to see how much of that he wrote like right before it was published too, or how much because I know he was spending a lot of time on those notes in the appendices before the return. I guess it was maybe just before the Return of the King came out. I can't remember the details of that timeline, but yeah, he was spending a lot of time on those notes and appendices because one, he wanted to make them also match up with what he had in the Silmarillion, and so he slaved over those to make sure that was
right.
it, and it was also changing the Silmarillion at the time, or his Histories of Middle Earth.
But concerning hobbits, has got nothing to do with the Silmarillion. So that's just, to me, that just feels like another thing. Like he had the Silmarillion, which he slaved over the appendices to make them fit, and then he had the Hobbit, and he slaved over the prologue to make the Hobbit fit with
and he knew great minds like the writer's room at Amazon would come in and fill in those spaces of where hobbits were in the Second Age that he didn't have time to do. So
you know what I missed in the prologue was the part where they were psychopaths and they would leave their own kind to die on the road.
That's right.
He didn't mention that, which Tolkien just had a missed opportunity. Clearly that's the kind of people that these folks are, is the kind that would leave their own kind because they get a wheel stuck in a rut or something.
Oh man. Changing the holy text, Joseph Smith. Okay, so oh man. All right. How much do you like the change? I'm gonna say with this one, this might be one of the best changes because I think he captures the hobbits really well without beating us over the head about who they are and exactly what they do, but it's a few short phrases. Now, the prologue, which we'll get into in the next episode or two, the prologue in the theatrical edition, the original edition, starts with Frodo and meeting Gandalf, and they put a little bit of that in when they have a little interplay between the two of them.
Yep.
But I think in here, it really gives us a good sense of the hobbits, and I think it was completely worthwhile. How much do I like the change, man? I think it might be his best. I'm going to give it a solid 4.9. I think it was a great change because to put the whole prologue in would have not been.
So this is the kind of thing where, because I have no complaints about this one at all. I mean, maybe their one great love is food. That's a little bit of a stretch, but it's just so good. This whole thing is so good. It is literally this change, because it's a change from the theatrical to the extended edition. This change is literally, in my mind, bringing more Tolkien into the movie.
That's a good way of putting it.
And so because they're bringing more Tolkien to the movie, I asked myself when I was thinking about this change, like, if this isn't a 5, what is a 5? So I'm going to give it a 5. So
wow. Okay. I was close. I
think 4.9 is pretty much the same.
Yeah. I'm just leaving myself just in case there's something that we go across that I do like better.
No worries.
And if not, I can live with myself with never giving this movie a 5.
There
okay
are no
with that.
perfect scores in Jonathan's mind.
No,
No one can get an A+.
never. All right, good. Wow. Hey, that was great. Look, guys, we love the films. See? In fact,
Totally.
I will say, by the time that if this would have been the prologue that I saw in the theaters, I would have probably started off on a better foot. Then honestly, I will say Frodo's awkward smile when he hears Gandalf.
I've thought that a lot about the extended editions. I wish so much the extended editions would have been in the theater. I mean, you could have even. I know this is not work from a corporate and revenue perspective, but as a fan, I would have loved it. It's like, here's the version if you want to go see just a long movie, and here's the version if you're an actual fan. Yeah. And the limited release in a few theaters, and I would have been happy with that.
Yeah, but back then, remember, it was actually still film that they had to send out everywhere. They didn't have digital projectors to just like send the files around. That's was all film, and so they couldn't really do that easily. It would take a lot more work, and that's why I think now you do see some, a lot of more special editions coming out in the films or even longer films because it's easier to spread those around.